Hello and welcome to Analysis with me, John Rees. The United States has announced it will be accelerating deliveries of military equipment to Iraq. The aim is to help the Iraqi government fight rebel groups in the Anbar province, including al-Qaida-linked militants who, it is claimed, captured positions in Ramadi and large parts of Fallujah recently. White House spokesman Jay Carney said, "We're working closely with the Iraqis to develop a holistic strategy to isolate the al-Qaida affiliated groups, and we have seen some early successes in Ramadi." The takeover of these areas by Sunni protesters and members of the al-Qaida affiliated group, the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, will be particularly painful to the Americans, as both cities saw some of the most bloody fighting during the US-led occupation. The standoff between the Iraqi army and the insurgents also posed a dilemma for the Obama administration, torn between distaste for Iraqi Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki and the resurgence of al-Qaida in the country. Joining me in the studio is Paul Schulte, who's a visiting fellow at King's College London, Sabhar al-Muktar, president of the Arab Lawyers Association, and Zaid al-Issa, who's a Middle East political analyst. But first, before we look at the discussion, let's take a look at the report.
Dozens of families have fled the city of Fallujah, seeking refuge from Iraqi government shellings aimed at repelling a group of militant Islamists which contains al-Qaida-linked elements. The Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, also known as ISIL, has taken over parts of Fallujah and Ramadi, which are both Sunni strongholds in the Anbar province.
We have come from Fallujah. The situation there is not good, and we came here to my uncle's, me and my family.
Fighters are reported to have stormed police stations, seized weapons, freed prisoners, and set buildings on fire. They also said they will punish those supporting the government led by Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki.
The revolutionaries of our tribes in Fallujah have resolved to punish the tribesmen who supported the sectarian government forces and to join the military council. The revolutionaries are also determined to shoulder the responsibility of foiling the filthy scheme run by the government.
Iraqi government forces have been accused of failing to get a grip on security since US troops have pulled out of the country 2 years ago, with 2013 cited as the deadliest year in Iraq since 2008. The ISIL is said to be supported by local Sunni tribal fighters and has been bolstered by cross-border ties with its affiliate in Syria. The group is also one of the strongest rebel units fighting government forces in Syria, but is facing oppositions from an alliance of other rebel groups which resent what they see as ISIL's harsh interpretation of Islamic law. Some Sunnis also claim they have been marginalized and accuse Maliki's Shia-led government of discrimination. Even so, while some tribal militias are supporting ISIL, others are backing the security forces. This complex three-way fight not only jeopardizes the fragile stability of the country, but also bears important consequences on the ongoing conflicts in neighboring countries. Flaminia Giambalvo, Islam Channel.
So, Paul, let's just take the wide view for a moment. Is what we're looking at here in the kind of long perspective that the war and the occupation broke apart Iraq and that nobody's been able to put it back together since then?
Certainly there was an impact and an atomization and a melting down in violence after the occupation. Whether Iraq could have held together under Saddam indefinitely is another question. I think if you look at Syria, there's another Ba'athist dynasty which held on for years, but then has collapsed with militarized sectarianism in roughly the same way that we're seeing in Iraq.
And what's fueled, in your opinion, this peak in the conflict that we're watching right now?
I think there is an overflow from Iraq, from Syria next door. Fighters and ideas and intentions move across the border. There is no effective border control. But as the journalist said, the Maliki government seems to be much to blame for having run a very determinedly sectarian regime ever since it has had the power to do so. And that's led to a kind of a cumulative resentment in the Sunni areas, Anbar, a notoriously militant province. And so it was a place where the spark would naturally happen.
Sabhar, I mean, did you locate this back in the original American-led occupation, and is the American intervention now liable to improve or worsen things?
I think it will. First of all, I think it will worsen things. I don't think the Americans have the intention of going back or the ability. They have no intention and no ability to do that. The talk of arming Maliki and speeding it up is probably a nonsensical exercise, because this is not likely to happen until after the election, so to speak. And the Maliki is keen. The whole exercise, in my view, is that Maliki is trying to secure a third term when it is in the constitution he cannot have a third term. He wanted to have a third term. There is a vacuum other than Maliki, because he's got the power, he's got the militias, which became the army. But he is not doing the other part, whereby he allows others to participate. And it's not only sectarian. I mean, he has a problem within the Shiite camp. He has a problem with Muktar al-Sadr. He has a problem with Alawi. He has a problem with the tribes in the south. At the present moment, the action which is being taken, which is being portrayed that it's a war against Qaida and the ISL, in fact, it's nothing to do with that. It's Maliki using this to fight the people who are against them. Well,
there's quite an interesting thing going across on the whole region. I mean, obviously the Americans launched the whole war on terror rhetoric as a justification for the original attacks on Afghanistan and Iraq. But I mean, it's now being played back to them by Bashar al-Assad in Syria, by the military government in Egypt, and now by there's a distinct sound of chickens heading home.
Yeah, it's everybody is using this magic word. Whenever you have a problem, just say you are fighting Qaeda, and immediately Russia will come to your aid, Europe will come to your aid, America will come to your aid, and then after that they begin to think whether it's really Qaeda or not, and who it is, and they are looking for some sort of a designer-made Islamic movements. They have to be particularly in one way or another. They are trying to forget the idea that the whole region is full of Muslims and you can't change it. They haven't come to terms with that, and I find it even more difficult now that the Russian Republic is doing what the West was doing some 6-10 years ago. They are being so sensitive to this issue. And it doesn't matter whether they are Hezbollah or Brotherhood or Qaeda or any religious something or another scares the Russians out. The Americans and the Western powers are beginning somehow to slow down on that one. But really what's happening in Iraq, it's nothing to do with the sectarian, it's nothing to do with the Qaeda. This is simply, Maliki is the new dictator of Iraq. He has excluded everybody. And when you look at the 44 members of the parliament have resigned, ministers have resigned, the political parties within the coalition government are pulling out, the tribal leaders in the south who haven't taken part in the uprising are again refusing what's happening. But nevertheless, he is getting comfort from the words he's getting from Europe and the US.
So Zaid, is that how you see it, that we have an unpopular and increasingly embattled Iraqi leader here, who the Americans might not like, but it's the kind of lesser of the available evils?
Well, I mean, let's go back a little bit, because there are historic facts that we can't jump over. One of them is that Saddam Hussein was a dictator. He unleashed war against Iran, and then with American support, with Arab support, particularly the Saudi support, they funded him to the hilt, they backed him up diplomatically, and then he basically rewarded them by invading Kuwait and occupying Kuwait and refusing to retreat from Kuwait, which was a sovereign country. And during that time, we mustn't forget that in 1991, there was a massive, huge uprising, which broke out in the south, in Basra, and it literally liberated 14 provinces out of the 18 provinces of Iraq. This is a fact. The Americans turned their backs on the popular uprising. That is because of huge, immense Saudi pressure and threatening that the whole coalition that the Americans worked at would be broken up because they were financing the whole thing. And that popular uprising was basically quashed, and those people who dared to speak up against Saddam Hussein were wiped out under the very eyes of the Americans. And we all remember that Bush, the senior, he deceived the Iraqi people when he promised them.
Bring it forward.
Let's move forward. What's basically happening now, the fact cannot be hidden that the Americans were there on the ground, and Fallujah happens to be the bedrock and the heartland of the insurgency. Al-Qaida was there in Fallujah, and that's why the Americans were forced to go into Fallujah in 2004. There were 2 attempts, and the Americans actually dislodged and liberated Fallujah. But what is important, that Fallujah remained in the hands of, insurgents up to the time when the Americans managed to establish, first of all, the surge, and after the surge, there was the actually the establishing of the Sahwas, bringing on the tribal leaders. Now, let's not forget, it is the tribal leaders who fought against al-Qaida. So it's not a myth that al-Qaida was based there. It's its heartland, it's its strong base. The tribal leader turned on the al-Qaida, worked with the Americans, worked with the Iraqi government in order to deal a devastating blow to al-Qaida. Now, the situation calmed down 2002-2008 until the Americans withdrew. We mustn't forget that the same kind of violence, for those people who say it's Maliki and that's what, I'm not here to defend Maliki, because we had a similar situation under Ja'fari. It's not a personality thing. Ja'fari was there, and he was forced also to resign under the pressure of both the Kurds who started it, also the Americans didn't like him.
I'm going to stop you there because we haven't got time.
One important fact about the
Constitution. There have been several there.
If I just come, one important fact.
Well, I'll come back to you in a moment, but that's a long contribution I want to bring you.
Says it's
that was a long contribution, so I want to bring somebody else in there. Paul, do you think that I think we can agree that there's going to be no American boots on the ground. So what do you think the reality is of the Americans offering military assistance?
Well, they're already offering surveillance drones and air-to-ground missiles. They've had already sold Abrams tanks, so there are, I think, $12 billion worth of American equipment which the Iraqi army and air force can deploy. The controversial question is attack helicopters, which have been held up within Congress but may now be agreed, but they won't be available for months, whatever happens. So it'll be American technical support, maybe some special forces advice, and lots of high-tech American equipment ready to go in to Fallujah. And I think the Iraqis will go in when they find the right tactical moment. I think there are behind-the-scenes negotiations happening at the moment. The government's trying to separate more and more of the tribal leaders from the al-Qaida extremist core. But everyone is poised for that because Maliki can't let this go. He partly secured his own position by suppressing a revolt in Basra, which was a Shia revolt. He can't let this deliberate Sunni challenge go without being crushed, because that's how the Iraqi state now can show that it can keep control of its territory.
Do you agree with that assessment?
To a certain degree, yes, but I think at the same time the problem Maliki has, is that, first of all, he doesn't want to go into a massacre, because they tried it in Hawija, which was a little one, and it really fired back. Now with Fallujah and Ramadi, he has to kill a lot of people. And this one is going to be very difficult for anybody to swallow, even the supporters. That's on the one hand. On the second hand, the problem he has is not with the weapons. The problem is with the fighting ability of his troops. The troops are not really a fighting force. They're, generally speaking, a number of militias which were all dressed up in the same clothes, and they have various interests rather than fighting and dying, so to speak. So it isn't the American power or the American military. It is the fighting forces is difficult. This is on the military side, and on the political side, he seems to have almost no support within the political process in whatever form or shape. Only very few people are really coming out in his support. The rest are either keeping quiet or making noises the other way around. And especially those people who want to really stand again for the election. They're trying to play the card on both sides. They want to stop the Qaida. They play the role of the Qaida. And the second one, that they want to get rid of the Qaida. But at the same time, they want to remain with the people and with the tribes and what have you. So this is the difficulty he has.
Zaid, do you think that it helps the Maliki government to be able to accept American aid because it looks as if Iran is now supporting that gesture?
Yeah, I mean, we have to look back a little bit in terms of the Americans were actually forced to leave Iraq. Obama had a major change of heart, although he pledged during his election that his first job is to remove the Americans from Iraq. He called it the stupid war. But when it came to the crunch, Obama wanted to leave 5,000 in order to shore up his position in the coming election so that it won't be used against him in the Republicans. But it was the question of immunity from prosecution that the Iraqi parliament refused to give, that Maliki was adamant that it has to be put to the leaders of the other political blocs. And he hugely embarrassed them by doing that. So the Americans have taught Maliki a lesson that by refusing to supply him with arms all along, they've watched during 2013 the massacres, the onslaught by al-Qaida, savaging innocent people in Iraq. They refused to move until, this is not again a myth or something out of something unreal happening. Al-Qaida have moved and occupied two major cities in Anbar. They are Ramadi and they are Fallujah. They are still holding on to Fallujah. They have been removed from bits of Ramadi with the cooperation, full support of the tribal leaders like Abrusha, who switched side. Going back to the fact that, you know, Maliki is accused of having a sectarian agenda. Again, let's look at the fact. 2008, as the gentleman mentioned, Maliki used and he led the forces himself to Basra to quash and quell the militias in Basra, and it was the first time that Article 4 of the Terrorism Act has been implemented.
I'm going to have to stop you there because we're reaching the end of part one of the programme. But we will, of course, be continuing this discussion of what's happening in Iraq and of American involvement in part two. So do rejoin us after the break.